Epizodi 8 I sezonit 2 të podkastit Flasim, dhe ndër të ftuarit që unë besoj se janë special gjithnjë në këtë tryez, sot është një ftuar shumë special, British historian, or British first historian.
Historian first.
Author.
European.
Author. Commentator. And serious historian. So my question is, which is more in risk when a serious historian discusses contemporary history, which is still in making, which is very near in distance, which doesn't allow much retrospective judgment? Is the history in risk, or is the judgment of contemporary facts in risk when an historian enters in the middle?
So I've often described myself as a historian of the present. And here's the interesting thing. From the time of Thucydides, the first true historian, until the 18th century, people thought the history of your own times was the best history. Because after all, that's what we know best, the world we ourselves live in. It's a very recent idea, only since the 19th century, that you have to wait 30 years or 40 years. Okay, so this book took me just 50 years to write, 50 years of traveling around Europe, writing it all down in my notebook. What I know uniquely is what it was like to be there, in East Germany, being spied on by the Stasi, or when the Berlin Wall came down, or the Velvet Revolutions of 1989, or Kosovo in 1999. What I know now is the consequences. So I think it's not a contradiction, they're complementary.
Yeah, this is a good way to advocate for both and to kind of advocate for what you do. But still there is a risk. I'm not saying a contradiction, but a risk.
Well, if I may, can I just come back on that? Because the problem with the historian who does the typical thing that the academic historian does and wait 30 years or 40 years is what the philosopher Henri Bergson called the illusions of retrospective determinism, the almost irresistible temptation to believe that what actually happened somehow had to happen. So take the end of communism, right? The fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War, the end of communism in Albania. To people today, it looks as if it was somehow inevitable. You know very well, it was anything but inevitable. And so what you lose is that sense of how it seemed to people at the time and what people didn't know at the time. So that's the advantage of starting writing the history from the moment of the present.
So then we go to the other question, which is, when you write your opinions, strong opinions, I must say, about current events, you write history, or you try to set a possible direction for your readers based on how you read the moment and also on what you learn from history?
So I would say the historian and the journalist, and I'm both.
This is the problem.
It's not a problem. It's a great advantage. Both fundamentally about seeking the truth. It's very simple. Both our jobs is to seek the truth. And we do it in slightly different ways. We do it by observing at front hand, coming to talk to a prime minister. You learn a lot from talking to prime ministers, but also sitting in libraries or archives and reading the documents from 50 years ago. So I don't think that is the tension. The tension comes when you start thinking of yourself, I call it Kissingeritis, when you start thinking of yourself as a decision maker, and you're trying to almost be a government and make a government policy, rather than what is our job, which is to try to seek the truth and then to tell it as it is, to speak truth to power. So that's what I've always understood myself as doing.
But in a way, when you tell truth to power, you question the power's decision.
Sure.
And when you question the power's decision and you say, it's not my job to make decisions, you somehow put yourself even above the decision maker, and without saying it, you pretend to have a better truth than the truth that leads the decision maker to his or her decision.
So here's the thing. Democracy depends on separation of powers. You have the judiciary, you have the legislature, the executive.
I'm fine with that.
And I think
but don't escape.
No, I'm not escaping. There's an intellectual equivalent of the separation of powers, which is we're playing different roles. You as a politician, right?
I'm fine with that. I'm just asking you now to confess here, because here you have to confess. I have to try to make you confess, and if you want to be shielding yourself all the time by some very well articulated arguments, it's fine, but I have to insist. So don't you think that when you say I'm speaking the truth to power, so this decision is shit, don't you think that you are giving yourself an irresponsible moral superiority by saying, I'm not responsible to do that, I don't do your job, but I'm telling you that what you're doing is shit?
Yes, I wouldn't use exactly that language about telling you what you're doing is shit. What I would say is...
No, I'm just bringing it to... I'm just making it from the beautification of the language,
okay,
to make clear what I'm trying to get out of you.
My good friend Václav Havel, who is one of the heroes of this book, who was a dissident and then a playwright and then a politician and a president.
We are not yet at the book. I'll come to the book.
But this is very relevant to this. His idea was you could simultaneously go on being an intellectual and be a politician and a decision maker. My argument is that they're simply different roles, that the politician necessarily has to take a particular line and then to push that particular line as best they can, to repeat it in order to win elections. Okay, the intellectual is constantly challenging, rethinking, looking at it from different angles. It's not a matter of one being morally superior to the other. Democracy needs them both. Absolutely. Just as it needs a parliament and an executive and a legislature.
I'm not questioning the right of your existence.
That's very good of you.
As a speaker of the truth to the power, I'm just trying to deconstruct a bit on what I started with. So, again, you are a historian and you are opinionist, let's say, author of books, journalist, all this, and it's a very good place to be somehow, because knowing history, you have somehow very, very strong instruments or very sensitive antennas to filter what is happening in the reality. But I wanted simply to know from you how much this can undermine one or the other, but you answered in a way, and I fully understand. But let's go a bit further then. You have been very much involved wholeheartedly, I would say, at least from what I read, in the change, in the big change, in the historical passage from totalitarian regimes to free societies. And the former communist regimes, revolutions have been your topic. Now, at that moment in time, you have been quite an enthusiast of what happened. Now, with the eyes of what is happening, don't you think that what you wrote at that time was journalism, and what you write this time about what you wrote that time is history.
Oh, I see the point. I think they're both history. I think they're slightly different kinds of history. I think one is history of the present, which, as I said, for centuries was considered the best history. No one would say Thucydides wasn't history. But what you don't know is the long-term consequences. So here, for the first time, 50 years on, I'm looking back with what in English is sometimes called the retrospectoscope, a wonderful instrument, the benefit of hindsight. To your point about freedom, because this is a book about Europe and freedom, the two leitmotifs of my life. When I started traveling in Europe in the early 1970s, most Europeans were still living under dictatorships. Not only Albania, the whole of Eastern, Southeastern Europe, but also Spain, Portugal, and Greece. They had fascist dictatorships. So the great story, not just of my life, but of Europe, is the spread of freedom and of democracy, and then of Europe coming together. And I don't think I view that with any less enthusiasm now than I did at the time when I was witnessing it. Obviously, there are big problems, there are always problems, but the fundamental story seems to me a great story of the spread of freedom. And one other quick thing. Many academic historians or scholars like to assume a sort of Olympian position, as if they are detached and neutral. Nobody is neutral, nobody is objective. I have a different approach. My model is George Orwell, Homage to Catalonia. You tell your readers exactly where you stand. I'm with the dissidents. I stand for freedom. I stand for democracy. I stand for Europe. So it's a contract with your reader. It's a contract of honesty with your readers, rather than the pretense of being Olympian and neutral, which contains its own kind of deception.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you in that. And the following is, what has gone wrong between what you witnessed in the beginning of this incredible change? And nobody, I think, questioned that this was really a big and positive change. You are a testimony that has always insisted to witness. So not a testimony that has shied away from witnessing in the public judgment stand. So when you witnessed the big change, you saw it with, of course, an objective eye on what was happening, but also a great subjective desire that this would lead to something wonderful. In the meantime, today, you continue to witness in the stand of the public judgment, and you are testimony that certain things went wrong. So if you can summarize in very little minutes what went wrong.
Two kinds of things. First of all, we underestimated what was going to be the reaction, the pushback. Classic example, the Russian Empire, the Russian Soviet Empire, right? We know from history about declining empires. They don't like it. Ask the British, ask the French. So when the Russian Soviet Empire just softly and suddenly vanished away in just 3 years, 1989 to 91, we should not have assumed that was the end of the story. I tell in the book the story of meeting Vladimir Putin in 1994, and he's already talking about Crimea. He's already talking about Russia getting back some of the territories that were always Russian. So that's about not anticipating what the other side were going to do, that Russia was going to try and get its empire back. The other half of the story is about our own mistakes. We, as liberal Europeans, and this is also a book of self-criticism, hubris, our old Greek friends, by the early to mid-2000s we assumed everything was just going to go on going our way, and that's precisely the moment, 2007, 2008, when it started going wrong in so many respects. We spoke a great deal about the other half of the world, the international community, Europe. We neglected the other half of our own societies. So I think it's them, but it's also us.
The other half meaning?
Meaning the people who voted for Brexit, the people who voted for Jaroslaw Kaczynski, the people who voted for Donald Trump.
We'll come to Brexit.
But I mean, those who were not happy with what for us, or at least for me as a liberal European, was a wonderful story of progress, of opening of frontiers, of Europe coming together. It didn't work for them.
But I think that, yes, and also it went wrong somehow for them, but it didn't went right also on the other side of the hemisphere, where them who were somehow our role model, our source of inspiration, our shining cities on the hill, had also this half and half.
The United
Right?
States.
No, meaning from the West, let's say.
Right.
So from the Western Europe to the United States, right? So it was they are connected somehow.
Completely. And what I would say is, it was precisely the West that yielded to hubris, that became complacent and lazy and self-satisfied. And there's an irony in this story, because in a way, the competition from the Soviet Union, the ideological competition from the Soviet Union, kept us on our toes. We had to compete. We had to prove that we had a better model. And so we had strong welfare states as well as strong economies. And in a way, we were the victims of our own victory. Suddenly in the 1990s, 2000s, it appeared we had no major global ideological competitor, which is what Francis Fukuyama was saying in his famous book, The End of History. And that's when we became lazy and complacent. Now again we have the competitor. We have Vladimir Putin, but we also have China.
Another part of it is, again, a different testimony of yours, that you are the same person, but once upon a time, and not a long time ago, you had a very nice way to explain what Britishness was. And you said that is like a paradox, but a former empire has become a post-imperial identity of inclusiveness, of civic and most liberal society. This was before, and now what is the Britishness? Because I don't think that it is there anymore.
I would respectfully disagree.
Tell me why. I want good news.
Here's the good news. What other European country can you find which has a Hindu prime minister, a black foreign minister, and a Muslim mayor of London? That fantastic capacity to embrace not just Scots and English and Welsh and Irish, but also people from all over the world.
No. I agree, but there is a but here. This, what you described, is the product of what you already explained at that time. So at that time, you detected this Britishness, okay? And you said, this is Britishness. So let's say the seeds and the whole climate that was there has made possible that this kind of tree grew, and these names are the fruits of it. But do you think that today's Britain would be able to continue in 10 years or 20 years' time produce the same with what we are seeing, the anti-immigration rhetoric, the very strong support for ideas and notions that at the time you described the Britishness would have sound like some fringe, outrageous, never electable opinions.
So I don't think, I mean, for me, Brexit was the biggest political defeat of my life. My whole life has been about Europe. I'm an English European. So for Britain to cut itself off from Europe is a tragedy for Britain, but also, I think, for the European Union and the future of Europe. But I don't believe Brexit has cut down that oak tree of Britishness that you're describing. I think it's still there.
There's still hope.
And and by the way, because you and I were just talking a moment ago privately about migration. So I think one of the mistakes, Tony Blair, who I admire in many, many ways, it was a wonderful period in British history, one of the mistakes he made was to believe that you could just go on opening your society, opening your finances, opening your economy, opening to migration, and there wouldn't be a reaction, because there was a reaction. And the slogan of the Brexiteers, which won it, by the way, only 52% to 48%, remember, it wasn't inevitable at all, was take back control. What do you have now in Germany? You have Germany's leaders talking about the problem of Kontrollverlust, loss of control. So I think all our societies need that sense that it's under control, that immigration is being managed. And so I think that was actually a mistake of the Blair years, for which we paid a heavy price. But the fact that we now are trying to get it under control, like all other European countries, does not mean it's the end of our, it's beyond multicultural.
Listen, first of all, I have to inform you that I'm very open, but I am fanatic about some things, and one of that is don't touch Tony Blair when I'm here. Just don't touch.
Listen, I'm friends with Tony Blair. But this is he's big enough to acknowledge his own mistakes.
No, I'm not speaking for him. He can speak himself and he can deal himself with his mistakes. But I am a fanatic, so don't touch Tony Blair. And not to advocate for him, but sorry, Tony Blair has left his office how many years ago? So it's not. I don't think it's not really very accurate that what happened with Brexit be left to Tony Blair as another mistake, because maybe at that time I don't know, but maybe at that time open was the right way, and maybe close is more like a response in a rush, looking the control being lost, instead of having done some other things before. And it was Tony Blair afterwards. But the problem in Britain with Tony is that everything he speaks, people tend to not listen, but to say, you were guilty for Iraq, so don't speak, you are a criminal. But since long ago he has said and proposed that there is a way to control. So he has been one of the people that has made propositions about control. So I could be very easily his biographer, but not like you from inside, but from outside.
So I spoke to Tony for this book. I went back, and as you'll see in the book, I actually spoke to him about this, and I think he would acknowledge it. Britain was the only EU member which, with the big enlargement in 2004 and again 2007, Bulgaria and Romania said, no limits, anyone can come. And that the millions of East Europeans who did come to Britain, which was wonderful for me, because I could speak Polish.
No, the millions of Europeans that came to Britain, they came to Britain's benefit big time.
I couldn't agree more.
Because you see, when they started to leave after Brexit, you needed truck drivers,
But every analyst of Brexit would tell you, and this is simply people seeking the truth, that one of the reasons people gave for voting for Brexit was the scale of immigration, particularly from inside the EU. That's what makes it different from other European countries. So it's simply a fact. And I don't think Tony would have any problem with someone...
No, I don't know what he thinks about it. I didn't talk about this precisely, but Okay, I'm not gonna debate with you there because it would be too pretentious and maybe too superficial from my side. Thank you for telling me that there is hope for Britain. This is good news. I want to go to something else that is very dear to you and is very dear to me, but still you are the speaker of the truth to power. I am a former speaker of the truth to power that have to deal with power, and sometimes this is like, you know, a strong battle within. I'm talking here about the freedom of speech, which is very dear to you, and you have even wrote the role of Europe in political freedom, diversity, free speech, and you have wrote something that I want to ask you and develop a bit, elaborate a bit. You have wrote, I quote, "We need the way to combine freedom and diversity," and this, if I'm not wrong, is a reflection on your preoccupation on how the freedom of speech is being abused, big time, right? And you say, the way to combine freedom and diversity is to have more but better free speech. Now, this is a very noble way to look at it, and but is it possible? And how this can be possible when, by the way, talking about podcasts before we started, you said that you have done many, and you find it a good way to get the people's ear, because people are most of the time not keen to read more than 2 pages while they can listen. So how freedom of speech can be better in a world where the listening degree of people goes down and down and down, and the possibility to say everything you want to say, even without really thinking twice, goes up and up and up.
Freedom of speech doesn't mean anyone can say anything like wherever, in whatever context. There have always been some limits to it, and it's always been about 2 things. Question number 1, how free should speech be? Question number 2, how should free speech be? In other words, how should we speak, how should we choose to speak to each other, given the very generous limits that the state should allow? Now, here the problem is that it's wonderful that you and I are talking directly to each other, but most of our speech today is being mediated by the big platforms, by Facebook or Google or Twitter, and they are mediating in a way which gives us, privileges the most extreme views. Their algorithms optimize for attention and therefore for profit. And you know, the structure of the way in which what I call the private superpowers, these platforms, is giving us worse speech rather than better speech, is for me one of the deep structural problems. I mean, take Twitter. I don't know if you're on Twitter, aren't you? Yeah. So I absolutely love Twitter because it was like the ancient Greek marketplace. I mean, it was a public platform where people spoke publicly. If they'd said something stupid, they were contradicted. Elon Musk takes it over, needs to make more money, and the quality of the platform has gone way down. So that's only part of the answer, but I think an important part of the answer.
Yeah, but this is not really the answer of how. This is the answer of why. And absolutely, this is one of the reasons why the quality of free speech is deteriorating. Yeah. The quantity of bad speech, if I may say this, is augmenting, and the effect on the young people is devastating. So I always remember my first encounter with the free speech world when I was asked to publish something in The Guardian. It was in the 90s, and It was out of a problem I had to get a visa in the British Embassy in Paris. I was invited by a friend in London. My friend was angry, and he said, write something, and I'll ask the Guardian to publish. And it was like, wow. So I write something. At that time there was no mobile phones, and I send it. And when I come back to my atelier in Paris, I just listen to the answering machine, and I hear a voice, Mr. Rama, I'm calling you from the Guardian, and I'll need to talk to you. So your article cannot be published tomorrow because we need to talk. I said, what happened with my article? But it was too late. So I call, or she calls, or whatever he calls, in the morning, and I was asked about the title, which is perfectly fine, and I was asked about 2 changes that were perfectly fine, totally mild. And I said, I was shocked. I said, but you didn't publish the article because you wanted my authorization for these changes. Of course. And the second experience I had, again with the free speech world, was with New Yorker, when Jane Kramer came here to make a portrait of mine as mayor. She spent a week here, and she asked people and this and that, and talking to me, and before leaving she said, Edi, you have to pass through something that is not really an exciting experience, but is the fact-checking. I never heard about fact-checking. And then they started to send by email questions. And in one point in the article, in talking to her, I said, when I met this person, she was dressed in red. And they sent email to that person, do you agree with the quote, you were dressed in red? I wrote to Jane, I said, Jane, this is not fact-checking, it's KGB. And her answer was, ha ha ha, it should be a reason why New Yorker never lost a court case. Now, sorry, but from that to the melting pot of all kind of rubbish, all kind of disgusting, not filtered, not even thoughts, but just throws out from the belly to the public. It's 2 completely different civilizations.
Yeah, the Guardian's still going, and still has.
And you know, I had a third experience with a German paper. 2 journalists last year, coming to me, Der Spiegel, by the way, and they made an interview, and they asked me to review, and I said, this is incredible. It's fantastic. Never had this with journalists lately. And the woman said, we continue to do this, but keep in mind that when cuts of personnel occur in the editing world, fact checkers are the first to be cut.
So here's the problem: the motto of the Guardian.
I think she implied it would not be there for a long time.
So here's the problem: the motto of the Guardian, going back to a great 19th century, early 20th century editor, was comment is free, but facts are sacred. And now they say comment is free, but facts are expensive. In other words, it requires a tremendous investment of time and effort and money to keep the facts. If I may say so, I was having a conversation here in Tirana a couple of days ago, and a friend of mine said, if I'm outside the country and something happens in Albania, if I just go to Albanian online media, I find it very difficult to establish what the facts are, because there's not a reliable fact-check place.
You are completing the panorama, and thank you for that. So the question is back. How the hell we can have a better speech
Okay.
in this kind of atmosphere that does not encourage improving the speech, does not press improving the speech, does not really ask improving the speech, and where the freedom of reach has completely replaced the freedom of speech. So newspapers, people in newspapers say, listen, if I check, I'm lost because the other one will publish. So the news is out. So whatever it is, it's out. So I have to follow.
So I would go at it from two sides. First of all, what I started saying about the conditions of production. In other words, how does this stuff come to us? It comes from these big platforms, it comes from newspapers, from the television, okay? So if you have your Guardian, your Economist, your FT, and your BBC, where these facts are checked, you're getting the clean air of good speech into the society. 3 years ago, the US and Britain were both hyper-polarized, utterly divided societies, Britain because of Brexit. Today, Britain is nothing like so divided, and the US is more divided. Why? We have the BBC. We have reasonable, reliable media where people actually can distinguish between facts and hysteria and fiction. The other side of it is, I'm sorry to say this, but education. If you go into a food shop and you buy a sandwich, you get a label which tells you exactly what all the ingredients are. If you're a kid and you go online and you get a piece of information, you've no idea what's in it and where it comes from.
Yeah.
So I would go at it from both sides, from the consumer side and the producer side.
Yeah, I don't know. I just I'm closing this part by recalling here a great man, another person of whom I'm fanatic. He's not alive anymore, Michel Rocard, right? The great French politician, the greatest prime minister of France, in my view, after Second World War, and one of the greatest political thinkers who, before dying, gave an interview and said, "Internet has taken from us the most precious thing God gave us, the time to doubt. There's no more time to doubt. You have to be there, ready with your side of the story, and you just shoot." And all these platforms that are supposedly new spaces of freedom of speech and of democratic dialogue are everything but platforms of dialogue. Everything is there but dialogue. There are trenches, there are people in the trenches, everyone shielded with his own flak certainties, and everyone ready to shoot towards the other trench, whatever comes in the mouth, whatever comes in the mind, no filter. So it's a disaster. Anyhow, I'm more pessimistic than you in that, and thank you for injecting me some optimism. I don't know how long will last, but I hope until tomorrow. Let's go now to the book. You have published a book that now it's in Albanian. It's the translation is in Albanian. Literal is Vendet e mia is my countries, my places, my countries. Personal history of Europe. Vendet e mia, një histori personale e Europës. Zotnia që është këtu. And I left it in the end because I started with a British, and I wanted to end with a European, but you didn't let me do everything like planned, which is perfectly fine. And I wanted to start this part with this car because I find beautiful the cover. And I find absolutely amazing this car, which is apparently from another time. And I wanted to ask you if this car is a picture you or your designer found to somehow connect the old Europe with the new Europe, or you are the driver here.
I'm so glad you picked up on that cover, because
It's beautiful.
This Albanian cover is unique.
Yeah, but because I saw the English version and was not.
This in Albania alone, and this is my wonderful Albanian publisher Linda Dudai. I describe the very first time I came across the English Channel from this strange remote island, Britain, to what we then called Europe, continental Europe. And it was in this car. It was called a Hillman Super Minx, not a very good car, from the 1960s. My father was at the wheel, and Arlinda found a picture of the actual dashboard of that car. So that is the car in which I first came to this strange place called
So
Europe.
Arlinda found it.
Yeah.
Chapeau to Arlinda.
Chapeau. Absolutely fantastic.
Fantastic. So this is really a book that I must read all the way. I have gone a bit through. It looks fabulous, and I just want to kind of ask you about Europe, but a bit, jumping over your two existences as historian of the present and as historian of the past. I want you to be the historian of the future. Tell me where Europe, in which place Europe you will be in 10 years.
So, I mean, first of all, just to the title quickly, the wonderful thing about being a European is that you can be at home abroad. I'm in Tirana, I'm in Paris, I'm in Warsaw, I'm in Madrid. I'm clearly abroad, but I'm at home. Hence, homelands. And that is something unique that we have built, which is this mix of unity and diversity. And this comes to your question, which is now, after many years in which Western Europe really wasn't that serious about eastward enlargement, I would say since 2008. Croatia came into the EU, but you know this better than anyone. Macedonia has been a candidate since 2005. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022, Europe has got serious about eastward enlargement again. And so I really think, Heraclitus, by the way, the ancient Greek historian, said war is the father of all things. True again here. This big war is the father of this change. And I would say we have an opportunity once again to make that kind of great step forward that we did in the 1990s and early 2000s with the first big eastward enlargement of the European Union and of NATO, all the way to the Baltic states, all the way to Romania and Bulgaria. So that's the opportunity. The risk is that the war in Ukraine has also showed us that we're in a difficult and dangerous world for the West. So we have the post-war period between 1945 and 1989. We have what I call the post-wall period, from the fall of the Berlin Wall, 9th of November 1989, to the 24th of February 2022. We're now in a new period. What's it going to be called? I think it might be called the post-Western period, because suddenly we discover that we have Russia fighting a brutal war of recolonization against Ukraine. But China doesn't mind. India doesn't mind. Turkey somewhat sits on the fence. South Africa is happy to do naval exercises with Russia and China together. Brazil doesn't mind that much. So we're trying to build this larger and better Europe, but in a world of post-non-Western middle and great powers, which have a very different view of how things should be. So for me, that is the challenge.
Yes, but the question was, tell me where Europe will be in 10 years. These are all analysis. Now, how it will go. try to be, for once, the historian of the future.
The historian of the future is a contradiction in terms. Historian of the past,
Yeah,
historian of the present, you know.
I know, but still,
Okay.
I'm challenging you to survive this contradiction in terms.
So first of all, the great motto of the Albert Italian Antonio Gramsci, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. If you look at all these huge challenges we face, plus climate change, plus demography and development, it's difficult to be intellectually optimistic. I think if a new generation of Europeans mobilize not only to defend what we have achieved, which is the best Europe we've ever had, but to extend it and improve it, which is entirely possible. We could look back in 10 years' time, we could have an European Union of 35 member states, and we could have defended what we have, our own free way of life in Europe. It's possible, but it's up to us.
Okay, but first of all, absolutely, but 100% agreeing with you that Europe, as was conceived and as has been somehow unfolding based on the huge vision and dream of the founding fathers, is the most wonderful political project of the humanity, in my view. So humans have conceived nothing more wonderful than Europe, the European Union,
In
and
politics.
European
In
politically.
Yeah.
Politically, I mean. So I'm talking about the European Union. Absolutely. The problem is, in my view, that to go at that place you described is not so about a young generation of Europeans and all this, but it's about something, first and foremost at least, maybe not exclusively, something you yourself has written. Europe must take itself some characteristics of an empire. This is the key. Explain.
So,
because an empire with 35, I don't see working. 35 leading. Empire can have also 350, but the point is who leads.
Here's a deep paradox. If Ukraine manages to defend its own independence, that will be the end of the last major European empire, the Russian Empire. So for the first time in more than 600 years, we'll have a Europe without empires, overseas or on land. But in order to achieve that, Europe itself has to acquire some of the characteristics of an empire, because we have to be able to defend ourselves, right?
Yes, but
and so it has to be something novel in history, which is a non-hegemonic empire, an empire without a single hegemon, particularly, by the way, if the United States is within
an empire of the willingness of everyone to be part of it.
To be part of it, but I mean to do more together.
Yeah, of course, but
and
I mean not hegemonistic in that way.
Without a single country as the hegemon. This is the key point. By the way, 6 months ago, I'm sitting in the foreign ministry in Kiev, heavily sandbagged, with the Ukrainian foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba. And he says to me, for us, Europe is a liberal empire, a peaceful empire, non-hegemonic, by consent. And we want to leave that bad old empire, the Russian Empire, and enter the liberal empire. But to do that, we have to go further than we have done so far. And you know what? No one has ever done this before. You said how beautiful the European Union is. Absolutely, that's the point of this book. This is the best Europe we've ever had. But no one has ever put together so many European countries in a union that is strong, can defend itself economically, militarily, technologically, and otherwise, but at the same time is non-hegemonic, that keeps this balance between unity and diversity. So let's not kid ourselves. This would be totally unprecedented in history.
Yes, and it's much easier to solve the contradiction between being a historian and writing the history of the future than envisaging functioning non-hegemonic, hegemonistic and non-run by an hegemonic power empire, which includes 30 and more, maybe 40 states, and which is capable to have unity, to have decision making in real time, to have bold leadership, and to be efficient. So let's leave it here, because
could I just say though that in 1989 I sat at countless conference tables when people said it would be completely impossible to get the Baltic states into a European Union and NATO. We've done the impossible.
Listen, I'm not saying it will be impossible. I'm saying simply that it looks more difficult to sort it out in conceiving it than to write the history of the future. But of course, maybe the people that will be able to do it will come.
And
I don't know.
Madeleine Albright, the former U.S. Secretary of State, tells a story that a senior French diplomat once said to her, "Madam Secretary, we know that will work in practice, but will it work in theory?" And I would say this is the other way around. In theory, it may seem impossible. The question is, can we nonetheless do it in practice?
We have run beyond 50 and more minutes without even, at least I'm speaking for myself, even imagining that 10 minutes are gone. So it has been too fast, and your experience, your field of interests, your space of truth spoken to the power is so large that we have unfortunately to leave for another time, and I hope that you will come back. Albania will be part of this dream even when everyone else will abandon the dream. It's what we do. We are always loyal to empires, so we will be till death separates us, loyal to that empire in making or to be made. But to conclude, I will go back as a final line to your first line, very first line of this beautiful book, which is even before the first line. And I'll bring here to the audience and to our discussion the Soren Kierkegaard quote. I'm trying to translate directly now from Albanian to English, and I hope I'll succeed, which says, it's true what philosophy tells you, that life has to be understood by looking back. But in the same time, the people forget the other principle, that life has to be lived by looking forwards. Don't you think that what happened in that moment we talked a lot today of anti-totalitarian revolutions was a big strength and an immense energy in looking forward and in just wanting to not look back anymore, while what we are living today is more and more the consequence of looking backwards much more than looking forward.
There was an old East European joke, I think it was Czechoslovakia in the 1970s, two people meet on the street. Hi, Jerzy, how are you? Answer, better than tomorrow. So that was then. That was how we thought about the future then. And then someone like Václav Havel came along and said, no, I'm not going to accept that fatalism about that world. I'm not going to be like Stefan Zweig, who said everything was finished. Of course we have to have a vision for the future, and I do. And in that future, having just received the key to the city of Tirana from your mayor yesterday, I look forward very much to coming back to Albania.
No, I don't question yours or mine keenness to look forward. I was simply stating that what we are witnessing as backlashes all over the place is the result of an attitude that is much more of looking backwards than forward.
I very much agree. So that one of the problems we had in this period of hubris in the early to mid 2000s, we thought everything was going our way and the future is ours. And now we have the opposite problem, is we think the future belongs to somebody else.
I just happened to watch an interview among many of Yuval Harari, and I was completely struck by a line that was so beautiful to me, because he was asked as a historian from the interviewer, you as a historian, how you see what's happening and what history has taught you about this. And he said, certain moments in time, you have to deal with two fundamental things: justice and peace. And it's always the best, it has always worked better to secure peace first and then look to justice. Because if you are obsessed about securing justice first and then look to peace, you'll have nor justice and neither peace. So fantastic. I'm so thankful. And again, I thank you also for the joke, and I am concluding myself with another, not joke, but an episode from the former communist Albania, when someone, a student of art, came back from his studies in in Czech Republic, I think Czechoslovakia at that time, because when he had to have his final stage and present his work to get his diploma, here the high art school, the academy, was already opening. So his Czechoslovak professor came with him, and he exposed his work in front of him and the others. And so he got a diploma. And the day after, when he went with his professor to accompany him to the airport, the professor said, I wish you all the best, but I can't hide to you that your future was yesterday. So much thank you. Vëndet e mia është libri I Timothy Garton Ash, një, siç e pat, europian I devotshëm, një historian, një gazetar, një autor libresh, I cili vjen në Shqipëri me këtë libër, të përkthyer nga kush e ka përkthyer librin, let me see, Virgil Muçi, një pen për të mos u lënë asnjëherë pa u lexuar, dhe të botuar nga Arlinda Dudaj. Ju falenderoj për vëmendjen, lexoni Vëndet e mia, po bëj edhe un pak reklam këtu. Dhe jam I bindur që mbas këtij leximi do të keni shumë të arsye për të ndjerë të përkushtuar në misionin